on this edition of Arirang News Center. Picking up speed, diplomats at the UN say Washington and Beijing have reached agreement on a UN resolution to impose tougher sanctions on North Korea. The draft could even be discussed at a UN Security Council meeting set to open in about 7 hours. Seoul's defense chief checks up on the combat readiness of his special counterterrorism units as Pyongyang steps up its rhetoric, threatening to turn South Korea and the U.S. into a sea of fire. And marking her third anniversary at the top office, President Park Geun-hye meets with entrepreneurs at one of the 17 innovation centers in this country. Her message: startups are the growth engines for the future. News Center begins right now. It is 8 a.m. in New York, at 12 noon in London, and 10 on a Thursday night here in Seoul. Hello and welcome to our viewers all across the globe. You're watching Arirang News Center. The U.S. will submit a draft resolution to the United Nations Security Council on Thursday in roughly 7 hours or so, seeking new sanctions to punish North Korea over its recent test of a nuclear device and the launch of a long-range rocket. The sanctions to be proposed are reportedly the strongest and the toughest yet. Our foreign affairs correspondent Kwon So-hwa starts us off with the details.
The strongest sanctions ever imposed on North Korea are expected to be adopted at the UN Security Council very soon. The 15 members of the Council will convene for a meeting Thursday afternoon at the UN headquarters in New York to review the new draft resolution. This as the United States and China have finally reached an agreement on that draft, which, according to the White House Wednesday, goes beyond previous resolutions. The U.S.-China accord is deemed a breakthrough, as the two superpowers not only wield veto power on the Council, but were the two countries that have been clashing most about the level of sanctions to be imposed on Pyongyang. Seoul's foreign ministry said Thursday that the resolution includes powerful and effective elements like none seen before, based on an earlier draft submitted by South Korea, but the ministry did not elaborate on the details.
Various unconfirmed reports on the content of the draft resolution have been appearing, but we ask you to understand we cannot give any details on that, nor are we at this stage where we can find out, as there has not been a final agreement reached on the resolution.
Anonymous sources say key North Korean agencies, such as the General Reconnaissance Bureau, which is in charge of intelligence operations, and the Ministry of Atomic Energy Industry and the National Aerospace Development Administration, which oversee the regime's nuclear and missile programs, are expected to be sanctioned. Meanwhile, South Korea and the U.S. will continue their talks on the North Korea sanctions on Friday, when Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs Daniel Russell is scheduled to meet with officials at Seoul's foreign ministry. Kwon So-hwa, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, China's special representative to the six-party talks, Wei, is scheduled to be in Seoul this week for talks with his South Korean counterpart, Hwang Jung-guk. Seoul's foreign ministry says that the officials will meet Sunday afternoon to share views on the international response to North Korea's recent nuclear test and long-range missile launch, including a draft UN Security Council resolution in development, as well as the situation on the Korean Peninsula. Now, Wu is expected to stay in Seoul until Thursday, and according to one official, he might also be meeting with Seoul's foreign minister, Yoon Byung-se. The official said Wu would be briefing Seoul on Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi's trip to the U.S. and Wu's trip to Pyongyang earlier this month. It is Wei's first visit to Seoul in 5 years. Seoul's defense chief pays a visit to the military's counterterrorism units to check up on their combat readiness in the face of the growing threats from North Korea. Now, one of those threats arrived later in the day today as North Korea once again threatened to turn South Korea and the U.S. into a sea of fire. Lee Ji-won has more.
South Korean Defense Minister Han Min-gu assessed the combat readiness of 2 counterterrorism units during a training exercise on Thursday. According to the Defense Ministry, Han instructed the troops to be prepared for any provocations from North Korea in a climate in which threats from North Korea are on the rise. Han also said the military is seeking to expand its counterterrorism operations in order to protect South Korean citizens. He was visiting a counterterrorism unit under the Special Warfare Command and the CBR team, which collects and analyzes evidence in the event of a chemical, biological, or radiological attack. The defense minister's inspection came ahead of another threat from North Korea published in the North State-run Nodong-Sinmun newspaper, resolving to turn South Korea and the United States into a sea of fire. This is the regime's latest salvo against the annual military exercises between the two allies, known as Key Resolve and Foal Eagle, which will reportedly be the largest ever. The North has long objected to the drills, claiming they are a rehearsal for an attack. The newspaper also berated the U.S. for targeting the North's leadership and said the drills are akin to a declaration of war. It added if the U.S. does not come back to its senses, the North will turn U.S. bases in the Asia-Pacific region and the U.S. mainland into ashes. 이지원, 아리랑 뉴스.
Three years ago today, President Park Geun-hye was sworn into office. On this third anniversary, the Korean president took the time to look into one of her initiatives that she feels dearly about, her creative economy drive at an innovation center in Central Korea. Our presidential office correspondent Song Ji-sun brings us that story and offers us a glimpse of the key words that reflect the president's 3 years in office in this fourth of our 5-part special series.
What was President Park Geun-hye's key focus during her past 3 years in office? The presidential office has analyzed over 1,000 remarks the president has made in public speeches and press briefings using big data. The word she has used the most is people, which she mentioned over 5,000 times, followed by Republic of Korea. Next on the list was the economy, which has certainly been a key focus for her since her inauguration.
어렵게 시작한 경기 회복의 불씨를 반드시 살려내서 경제를 활성화하고 민생을 안정시키는데 국가적 역량을 집중해 나갈 것입니다. 창의와 혁신의 기반을 둔 경제로 체질을 바꿔가면서 국민소득 4만 불 시대를 여는 기반을 다져가겠습니다. 그동안 추진해온 경제혁신 3개년 계획을 잘 마무리하고 창조 경제와 문화 융성을 확실하게 뿌리 내려서 우리 경제의 활력과 일자리를 만들어 갈 것입니다.
The president has also made frequent mention of the phrase creative economy, reflecting her continued emphasis on growth through entrepreneurship. Other key phrases on the list were also about the economy, including economic revitalization, economic innovation, and job creation. The president's creative economy drive is now in full swing with the launch of 17 innovation centers through last year. The centers foster startups by matching them with advisors and corporate partners that can help them launch their businesses. The network has already attracted over $120 million in investment, while helping some 800 startups turn their ideas into businesses. To mark her third anniversary in office, President Park Geun-hye visited one of the branches on Thursday and spoke about job creation and economic revitalization through new growth engines. At the Taejeon Center, job seekers and startups that receive services share their experiences with the president, like this company that has entered the U.S. with its video app service.
We raised over $400,000 in investments and launched our business in Silicon Valley last year.
While it is an era of low growth, President Park said there is always a silver lining, adding that new sectors through convergence must lead growth.
또 창업이 무한히 이루어지는 아주 창업의 천국이 되는 그런 대한민국으로 이제 뻗어나갈 수 있지 않을까 하는 기대를 합니다.
In keeping with these initiatives, President Park has vowed that 2016 will be the year that people feel the effects of the policies she's put in place and called on the people to help the country make another leap. Song Ji-sun, Arirang News.
Now, those were President Park's key words. Now let's take a look at some numbers. Over the last 3 years, there have been key events that have shaped President Park's term, and that's been reflected in her approval ratings. Our Kwon Jang-ho takes us through those figures and the people's voices behind them.
대통령으로서의 직책을 성실히 수행할 것을 국민 앞에 엄숙히 선서합니다.
It's been 3 years since President Park Geun-hye came into office. She has navigated her way through diplomatic highs and tragic lows. And so far, the Korean public is divided on their assessments of her presidency.
I was worried that as a female president, she would be too soft-hearted and too timid, but she has been tough beyond expectations.
She hasn't been able to control the National Assembly well enough, but she has been a firm leader for the country. It's important to lead in politics and not be led, and on that front, I think she's done quite well.
I doubt she feels she has achieved what she promised to do. I don't think she has done anything worth judging.
Over the past 3 years, there have been no advancements in the economy or society. In fact, household debt has increased. She hasn't done anything positive.
Let's take a look at President Park's approval ratings over the last 3 years. The first numbers came out in March 2013, a month after she took office, and she starts off with a positive rating of 44%. After that, her ratings rise quickly, and in September, they go up to 67% after she attended the G20 summit in Russia. Unfortunately, though, this will be the highest approval rating she ever receives. From there, her numbers wobble around in the 50s until 2014. And then it goes up to 61% in March after a speech she gave in Dresden where she laid out a plan for Korean reunification, calling it a jackpot for the peninsula. But then tragedy hit the nation with the sinking of the Seoul ferry, which left almost 300 people dead, most of them high school students. The Park administration was blamed for its slow response, and her reputation never really recovers from this point. Her numbers keep dropping going into 2015, hitting a low of 29% after a controversial new tax scheme that ended up costing some middle-class taxpayers. Her numbers recover slightly, but then the MERS outbreak hits and her ratings go back down to 29%. The disease kills 36, and the government is again blamed for its slow response. Her ratings languished until August when we see the spike. That's when the Park administration negotiated a landmark agreement with North Korea to ease tensions after landmines planted by the North injured 2 South Korean soldiers. The deal also restarted reunions for war-separated families. But that high didn't last long, and the numbers peter out until we come to this year. Although President Park has suffered some ups and downs over the last 3 years, she's ended up pretty much where she started, just 1% lower than that first reading.
We can say that she's managed to avoid fatal blows to her presidency, but it can also be said she hasn't done much to win over public opinion either. After North Korea's 4th nuclear test, there are many people who approve of her strong stance, but as a result, many are also worried about deteriorating relations with China and with North Korea. That mix of good and bad ratings is being reflected in the numbers.
If you look at the approval rating of previous presidents, you can see a significant downward trend during the 5-year term. President Park's numbers are within this band, but you can see that while she started off with the lowest ratings, her numbers are now the 2nd highest. She also has the most consistent ratings, but whether she'll be able to buck the downward trend for the rest of her term remains to be seen. So what do people want and expect from the remaining 2 years?
Because she was a woman president, I was expecting a warm, motherly figure, but instead we got a cold stepmother. I hope that changes and we get an understanding and kind-hearted person.
I hope things are done that our lives easier. I just wish for people's lives to be better.
I hope there's more help for the elderly who live by themselves and people in need. I hope she finds more ways to communicate with the people through debates and forums. I also want to see her working more in collaboration with the opposition party.
3 years down, 2 to go. President Park will now need to consider what kind of impression and legacy she wants to leave behind at the end of her term. Kwon Jang-ho, Arirang News.
Shifting our focus now to the National Assembly. Fearing the Anti-Terrorism Act will give the nation's top spy agency undue power to wiretap civilians, the main opposition party pulled out the filibuster card more than 48 hours ago. Now, with the marathon filibuster still going strong as we speak, our political correspondent Ji Myung-gil gives us a thorough rundown on what this controversial bill is and why the standoff.
The ruling Saeul Party has characterized the opposition bloc's filibuster as an act of terrorism against public safety. Its floor leader said Thursday that at a time of heightened tensions on the peninsula, the mechanisms in the bill are indispensable to countering threats from North Korea.
On top of its armed provocations, North Korea is threatening us with terror and cyber attacks, and even plotting to target the South Korean presidential office. The opposition bloc should immediately stop trying to hold the bill up.
The main opposition Minju Party of Korea initiated the filibuster because of concerns about a potential abuse of power by the National Intelligence Service, which has been embroiled in numerous political scandals over the years, including allegations of election meddling.
South Korean citizens now know that the security bill is a bill to empower the National Intelligence Service. This bill will allow the agency to engage in surveillance of people's private communications and give it unlimited power to track down financial transactions.
The party launched the filibuster after National Assembly Speaker Chung Ih-wha decided to use his authority to bring the bill up for a vote. Despite its objections to the bill, the Minju Party said it would reconsider if the ruling party agreed to revise the bill to limit the spy agency's power. Ji Myung-gil, Arirang News.
What this unusually long filibuster card has done is it refocused the general public's attention to state affairs. Our parliamentary correspondent Shin Sa-min hit the streets to hear them out.
The main opposition party's filibuster of a contentious counterterrorism bill at the National Assembly has captured the public's attention. The word filibuster, the counterterrorism bill, and the names of opposition party lawmakers topped the search list on Naver, Korea's biggest web portal. And the hashtags filibuster and counterterrorism bill are trending on social media. Even the National Assembly TV, which is live streaming the filibuster, has racked up its highest ratings since the station's founding in 2004. The Minju Party of Korea initiated the filibuster to block the counterterrorism bill, which it says will only empower the spy agency to conduct surveillance on civilians, while the ruling party claims the measures in the bill will better protect the country from terror threats. This sharp division between the parties is also reflected in public opinion.
Instead of delaying state affairs, I believe the ongoing filibuster should come to an end.
I hope the nation becomes more secure with the counterterrorism law by filtering out any potential threats.
But there are some who say the bill has raised privacy concerns.
I'm worried that the government will be able to monitor private conversations without a warrant when terrorism is suspected.
I don't understand why the issue was brought up after North Korea's fourth nuclear test. Our country has been able to maintain the security we have until now.
Some civic groups have even launched a demonstration outside the parliament in solidarity with the lawmakers who are filibustering inside. Although it's still unclear how or when the standoff within the parliament will be resolved, the flurry of activity there has certainly refocused the public attention on state affairs. Shin Sa-min, Arirang News.
The South Korean government is all geared up to support ailing South Korean enterprises with operations in the now suspended Inter-Korean Joint Industrial Complex in Kaesong, suffering damages from the abrupt shutdown. Today, it laid out a financial support package of emergency loans. Hwang Ji-hye has the details.
South Korea on Thursday pledged to offer 550 billion won, or roughly $450 million in special loans to firms with factories in the Inter-Korean Kaesong Industrial Complex. The companies have been hit hard by the shutdown of the complex announced by the government earlier this month in response to North Korea's launch of a long-range missile. The halt was a surprise for the 124 firms operating there. The financial support package ironed out during a meeting by a special government task force will carry low interest rates and relaxed lending criteria. The total is larger than the emergency loans provided when the Kaesong complex was closed in 2013. Back then, South Korea made around $280 million in loans available to the companies. On top of the loan package, the government will begin a special investigation into losses incurred by the Kaesong companies next month. The firms themselves estimate their initial losses to be around $650 million, including investments, operational costs, and raw materials. But with the companies expecting their losses to pile up over time, they're urging the Seoul government to offer its full support. Hwang Ji-ae, Arirang News.
Global banks haven't been doing so well, not well at all, in fact, in the face of weak global growth and falling commodity prices. With global economic conditions far from a recovery, their profits are hanging on the line. Our Kim Min-ji has more.
In a reflection of the slow global economy, banks in Europe are finding it harder and harder to make a profit. Standard Chartered posted its first annual loss in 26 years on the back of restructuring costs and faltering commodity prices. The bank's pre-tax loss stood at $1.5 billion, missing analysts' projection of $1.4 billion. It wasn't much different for HSBC. The bank posted a loss of $1.3 billion in the fourth quarter of last year, which was in stark contrast to the profit of more than $500 million it recorded in the same period in 2014. But in what could be a ray of light, banks in the U.S. are faring relatively well. According to the U.S. Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, nearly 6,200 commercial banks in the states posted a combined net profit of $40.8 billion, up almost 12% from a year ago.
The U.S. is seeing a turnaround in its economy, but in Europe, even though countries are undertaking stimulus measures, many global banks are going through restructuring. This can differ by bank, but the ones with greater exposure to emerging markets are being hit.
On top of that, with many central banks adopting negative interest rates, experts aren't predicting a rosy outlook, as the sub-zero rates will lower the net interest margin, which in turn will pull down banks' operating profits. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Well, when it comes to eye-watering levels of debt and general economic turmoil, Greece and Spain spring to mind as both went through a torrid time in the aftermath of the financial crisis that rocked the Eurozone a few years ago. But unlike Greece, Spain appears to be on the road to recovery. How did it do it, and what can we learn from the Spanish experience? Our Kim Ji-yeon files this report from Barcelona.
Spain was one of the countries hardest hit by the 2008 global financial crisis. Its economy was left in tatters after the bubble burst on its housing market and national debt soared. Even some 8 years later, the Eurozone's fourth largest economy is still suffering from one of the worst unemployment rates in the bloc at around 20%. So can it truly be said that Spain is back on its feet now?
Spain has been working hard to dig out of its hole after it was forced to ask for an EU bailout in 2012. And those efforts seem to be paying off as its economy is recovering on the back of rising consumption. The Spanish government's austerity measures, while painful, have helped the country recover more flexibility in its labor market. However, this came at the expense of big cuts to pensions and healthcare services. Soaring domestic consumption, industry investment, and record tourism also helped the Spanish economy grow 3.2% in 2015, its fastest pace since 2007.
The banks have understood that it's better at the end to restructure the debt and to get it paid later, but to get it paid, then don't do the restructuring and then having the company go bankrupt and lose everything. So a lot of this has already been done, a lot of this renegotiation. So I think that the economy is now in a much better shape and going up reasonably.
The International Monetary Fund forecasts the Spanish economy will grow 2.7% this year. The professor says the recovery in Spain and some other European countries are good reference cases for a country like China that is also restructuring its economy.
So sometimes the press says the economy collapses, goes from 7 to 6.9. Well, that's not a big collapse. But if you go into depth, you see, okay, there is people who were doing quite well, that they do well but not so much, have gone down, and people who were very poor, then they go up. So at the end, it's much better, this 6.9, than the other, because this generates a lot of consumption.
He says countries that depend on China for exports would also benefit as demand for their goods and services would increase. However, the professor adds that a Brexit or Britain leaving the EU would severely damage the Eurozone, as it will lose its biggest English-speaking finance hub. Brits decide on whether they want to stay in or leave the EU in late June. Kim Jung, Arirang News, Barcelona.
Now, back here in this country, a growing number of Seoul residents are moving away from the capital to neighboring Gyeonggi-do province. Why? Well, the rent in the capital is becoming increasingly unbearable, which is a trend that's likely to continue. Our Oh Soo-young sheds light on this phenomenon.
More and more Seoul residents are leaving the capital for the suburbs to avoid the ever-rising cost of housing. A new report from Statistics Korea shows that around 6,800 people moved out of Seoul in January, the biggest exodus among the 17 cities surveyed. The number was also double what it was in 2015, adding to the increasing outflow that year, which hit an 18-year high at 137,000. The biggest reason people have for moving out of Seoul is the skyrocketing cost of rental security deposits. The rental deposit system called jeonse is unique to Korea. It requires tenants to deposit a given percentage of a rental property's value instead of paying monthly rent. The cost of security deposits in Seoul shot up almost 8% last month from the year before, compared to the national average of 5.5%. With prices rising, 2 in 3 Seoul residents went looking for cheaper homes in neighbouring Gyeonggi-do province, which is close enough for those looking to commute to work. Last month, 9,000 people moved to Gyeonggi-do, which has been the most popular place for Seoul residents leaving the capital for 11 straight months.
I recently moved to Seongnam. Because of the high rental cost in Seoul, I think many people are moving to nearby cities.
Experts say that the exodus from the capital is likely to continue for the foreseeable future.
Rental costs in Seoul will continue to rise for the time being as landlords need to keep up their earnings margins to support expensive maintenance fees. This means more people may seek residence elsewhere.
The expert predicts the jeonse system could eventually exhaust itself if deposits continue to soar. Instead, housing contracts could shift towards a monthly rental system. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
The largest takeover of a Japanese technology firm by a foreign company is hanging in the balance. For details, Bruce Harrison joins me live in the studio. Now, Bruce, Japan's Sharp agreed to the offer made by Taiwan's Foxconn, but now Foxconn says it needs more time.
Yeah, Konyang, this is a huge deal. We don't know much. Foxconn has just said that it needs to clarify the terms of the deal. It's not ready to sign yet. It comes as a bit of a surprise because not long before that, Sharp Core had agreed to be bought by Foxconn in a nearly $6 billion deal.
Bruce, if the deal goes through, what does this acquisition mean for the two companies, for the two countries?
A lot of things. Sharp, for one, has been losing money for years now. So a takeover by Foxconn would drastically expand the sale opportunities for Sharp's LCD panels, for one. Acquiring Sharp would also help Foxconn compete against other Asian rivals, in particular Korea's Samsung. Foxconn assembles various electronics products, including smartphones for Apple. An official with a brokerage in Hong Kong said that with Sharp's technology to build components, Foxconn could compete with Samsung as an Apple components supplier, which would eventually help the U.S. tech firm wean itself off of Samsung. Initially, the state-backed Innovation Network Corps of Japan seemed the most likely suitor for this deal. With the backing of the government, it was seen as a more reliable investor, but its offer was less than half than that of Foxconn's. Foxconn's offer was also seen as more beneficial for Sharp's creditor banks, which are anxious to limit their losses after helping bail Sharp out twice already. In other news, border tightening in the Balkans has led to a growing number of stranded refugees, but they continue to come despite the travel restrictions. The number of migrants waiting at the Greece-Macedonia border has swelled into the thousands amid the harsh winter conditions.
The situation is terrible. It's so cold, and we are here for 4 days. We are waiting for the permission to pass the border. It's just terrible. It's just a problem. We need to pass.
Macedonia has been opening the border in intervals for only a few hundred refugees each day. Meanwhile, Austria on Wednesday reached an agreement with 9 Balkan states on greater border controls.
So tell me, what was Austria's really rationale for implementing greater restrictions?
Well, the EU has yet to come together, all 28 states, and reach a decision unitedly on how to deal with this crisis. So Austria and these Balkan states kind of took it in their own hands to start limiting the flow, which is nonstop, into some of their countries.
Right, and it's been ongoing for the last year or so. Mm-hmm. So a big problem that we should keep our eyes on.
Exactly.
All right, Bruce, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Well, time now to get a check on the weather conditions. Let's go live to our Lee Ji-hyun at the Weather Center. Ji-hyun, you know, the cold has certainly eased up today, I'm glad to say, and the skies were clear enough to enjoy the last days of winter without too much of a chill.
That is right, Ganyang. It was a sunny day today and temperatures were bearable. But a mix of rain and snow is in the forecast for many areas down south tomorrow, with up to 5 centimeters of snow expected in the southern provinces till tomorrow evening. And we could also see some fine dust sweep in overnight. Dust levels could be fairly high in most parts of the country, including here in the capital at times. So those of you with respiratory problems, you'll want to check the pollution levels before heading out tomorrow. As for the temperatures, it's going to be a bit warmer tomorrow morning, with a daily low kicking off at -2 degrees Celsius here in Seoul, which is about 4 degrees higher than today. 0 for Daegu and Busan and Jeju will wake up to a low of 2 and 4. And as for the daily highs, it's going to be similar to a tad lower compared to today, topping out at 6 degrees Celsius here in Seoul, 7 for Daejeon and Gwangju, while Busan and Jeju will see a high of 10 and 12 respectively. Temperatures will fluctuate for the rest of the month, with morning rain in the forecast on Sunday. Now that's Korea for you, and here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
And that is our broadcast on this Thursday night. I'm Moon Gun-young. Thank you, as always, for watching, and we hope to see you right back here, same time tomorrow on NewsCenter.